Welcome to Adulting with Joyce Pring. Watch the full video of this episode on my channel, www.youtube.com/JoycePringTV. And if you want to level up your adulting game, check out joycepring.com/collections for my digital products and course. I remember my therapist telling me that trauma is not what happened to you. Trauma is the response that your body has and your brain has because of what happened to you. And so that would look like, let's say, you were verbally abused as a child, you were berated, and so trauma might look like you don't like communicating with other people, especially when mataas na yung emotions, you either fight or flight. So it's either mamimimic mo yung pagsisigaw sa'yo or pag-verbally traumatize sa'yo, or mag-aalis ka na lang. As in, you don't want to deal with it. You just, you don't even get close enough into relationships to actually go into deep emotions like that. So I feel like this is something that all of us have experienced in one way or another. Lahat tayo napasahan ng trauma. And I think the best case scenario lang is minimizing.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to extinguish it because we live in a sinful and imperfect world. What do you think, love?
I think, obviously, syempre, one way or another, we'll be experiencing trauma. But I think the most important part that we as adults have to realize and deal with is acknowledging it first. Because if you're not acknowledging it and just going about your life without even knowing it, hindi mo malalaman kung bakit nangyayari ang mga certain stuff. Yung mga married couples, they don't really have a break from each other, or they don't really have a break from
being married.
From being married. Kapag may friendship ka, syempre uuwi ka, and there are a lot of escapes that you can do. Or kunyari, 'di ba, when you're with your parents, 'di ba, you don't really have to necessarily spend 100% of the time with them. Kaya lumalabas yung mga default settings natin that we got from generational trauma sa mga marriages natin. So I feel that that's the first step. That's a very important thing to do first, is to acknowledge it.
And that's hard, ah. I mean, like, people might think, of course, I will acknowledge it. But it's hard because that will entail you realizing and accepting na, okay, there's something that needs to improve within me. And two, that if you have this idealistic view of your parents or of your family, you have to accept na, ay, hindi pala perfect yung family ko. Ang dami palang nangyari sa akin na hindi okay. And the weirdest thing is, I never really knew that was what happened to me until I went to therapy. As in, parang my entire life, it was just, because siguro hyper-religious din yung, hindi naman upbringing ko, but the people, when I was growing up, medyo hyper-religious din. So parang I thought na, if I'm struggling with something, it's just because I have demons. Like, the devil is testing me. That's one. Or parang, hindi, there's just something wrong with me. I'm just like this. Ito lang talaga yung ugali ko. Ito yung personality ko. But then, when I went to therapy for it, na-realize ko na lahat pala ng pinagdaanan ko, experiences ko, and the things that happened to me contribute to how I was. And it wasn't normal. It wasn't a demon. It wasn't like a spiritual thing. Like, of course, we understand that there are spiritual aspects to it, but it was really an effect of generational trauma that was passed on to me. And the moment that I accepted and realized that, dun lang nag-start talaga yung healing. And you saw that, di ba?
Yeah. Well, isang napakalaking tulong is having someone mediate, just like what you've been mentioning, yung therapist mo. We individually talked to her, and I remember one time na syempre it's really different, and from the perspective of somebody encountering somebody with generational trauma in us, you, me, and then vice versa. It's hard to be logical because you're so emotionally charged. So I remember when she mentioned before na parang syempre hindi naman nat
She, me?
si Ma'am Tina, the therapist, she said na hindi naman, of course we acknowledge that it's here. it's causing friction or ganyan. Kunyari, yung generational trauma ko rin, yung things that I've dealt with the past and currently am dealing with now, it isn't easy to change. Kasi parang ang pagkaka-explain niya sa akin, it's like changing the wiring of your foundation. And that's extremely
Foundational kasi siya.
difficult. Kasi you've been, just like what you said, you lived majority of your life knowing that that's normal.
Yeah, and the fish doesn't know that it's in water. It's that the fish doesn't know it's in water. You don't know that was what you were going through. That was until nga you look back on it, diba? Parang, so that's what happened. Like, meron akong particular thing that I really, really struggled with in all my life. I thought it was just a demonic curse upon me. And then after going to therapy and tracing back everything that happened to me, the therapist was like, I can trace it back. Perhaps majority of it is because this has happened to you. And that's actually a natural response. Most trauma victims who've experienced that would respond in the particular way that you've been responding. And it just opened my eyes so much. And, I'm not saying na don't take your medicines. Of course, there is help in that. But particularly me, I took medicines. It never worked. And nag-work lang sa akin yung talk therapy. Kasi there was a rewiring that had to happen. And the medicines was just temporal solution lang siya to a recurring problem. Yeah. So parang I would take the medicines and I would be okay for a little while, maybe like a couple of weeks, a couple of months. And then babalik na naman yung same problem. So kailangan ko ulit magbago ng medicine. And you know that, right? Like, to the point na parang natakot na kami ni Watcha kasi parang hindi ko na natandaan na, nag-dinner na nga pala ako. Pero diba, parang naging forgetful na ako because of the medicines. And it was only really through therapy and lots of counsel, prayers, that I healed.
That's it for this episode of Adulting with Joyce Pring. If you liked this podcast, please don't forget to use the hashtag Adulting with Joyce Pring and also check out www.joycepring.com for the show notes and tag me on social media with at Joyce Pring. I'll talk to you guys again soon. Paalam!